Did anyone print it?
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Hi, welcome to County Hall and to the Place Committee meeting this afternoon on Thursday, the 30th of July 26. I'd like to thank you all for attending, much appreciated. Hopefully they'll be not too late this afternoon. Now, before we get going, I need to actually pass over to the clerk, so over to Hazel.
Just to explain that we would normally appoint the chair and elect the vice chair today, first meeting after the AGM, but a slight error in the preparation of the agenda means that we don't have that on there. So what we need to do is just elect a chair for today's meeting. Would anybody like to make that nomination, please?
Hello, as you know, I'm substituting for Councillor Dimmock today, but I'd like to nominate Councillor Jane Lucas, if that's okay.
Okay, do we have a seconder, please?
Can I second it? Oh, I don't mind if Louise does it, sorry. Sorry.
Great, we've got a rush to second, brilliant. Any other nominations, or are we happy with that? No, shakes of head, lovely, thanks very much. Councillor Lucas.
Thank you, guys, thank you very much. Okay, so we'll just carry on now. Next one is to welcome those members who aren't normally part of our committee, and thank you for attending, and of course the officers and the cabinet member. Next bit, apologies for absence. Lisa is away, and as Martin said, Councillor Newell has said that he is substituting, and to those online, hello, welcome both all of you online as well. Declarations of interest, item number 2, anybody? Nobody? Okay, wonderful. Right, just to, because I find it easier, I'm afraid, could we possibly allow, I don't know if we have to nominate it forward, items 6, 7 and 8 to move forward before we get into the meat of the meeting. Otherwise we tend to finish off in a big rush and don't know what we're saying. It's, and 3, oh yes, okay, as well. Okay, we're all right with that. So going on to item 3, which is public open forum. We don't have anybody for that, do we, as far as I'm aware? No? Okay. I didn't do my job properly there, did I? All right, item 6, Place Scrutiny Committee Forward Work Programme and Action List. Any Hazel or Rob? Rob, would you like to highlight any of it?
Nothing particularly, unless anyone wants, so any members want to say anything about it.
Okay, anybody wants anything said about Forward Action List? Are we all happy with what's on there currently? Yes? Wonderful. Okay. I have to say I find that the emails now with the action forwards from the committee, the cabinet, very useful. I really am. So thank you for that, whoever did that one. Cabinet and council work planner. Everybody happy with that? Any questions? No? I should move so I can see the screen. Everybody happy with that? Great. And then item 8, moving forward, is to confirm the minutes of the previous meeting. Anybody got any thoughts on the minutes in the last meeting? No? Wonderful. Moving on. And then we'll leave the date of the next meeting, but I'll bring it up now briefly. Next meeting will be the 1st of October. Right. So let's go to the meat of the meeting. We are now going to have a presentation on item 4, coming back, presentation of a petition to receive on the pro-petition order of the drive and accept for access Goldwire Lane, Monmouth, to agree a course of action for the petition. I'll hand over to Councillor Newell because he was going to present the petition.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you and congratulations on your re-election. I've been asked to present a petition to County Council, and if I could put on record that this is in no way me agreeing or recommending or endorsing this petition. It's simply that Goldwire Lane is in my ward, and as the ward member I feel it's my duty to present this on behalf of people that have an opposing view to other petitions, if that could be made clear. Thank you, Chair. So the petition reads, we the undersigned petition the Monmouthshire County Council to keep Goldwire Lane as a safe route into town to be shared by pedestrians, mobility scooters and non-powered bicycles. I'll simply read the note afterwards. We all regularly, and I say as we, the 285 people that have signed this petition, we all regularly used Goldwire Lane as a direct route into town from over Mono. We have used it for years and have had to stand back as vehicles came past, breathing in the fumes. Since the lane has been closed to through vehicles, we have been able to walk without having to squeeze onto the pavement all the time. Many children walk this route alone on their way to the schools, usually in 3s or 4s. Many older local residents have walking frames. We had no knowledge of a local consultation. And that petition was started by a lady called Rosemary Clark. Thank you, Chair. That's all I need to say on the subject. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now, I don't know how everybody feels, and I'll open it to everybody to express their opinions, but I feel that we have already visited this quite strongly and thoroughly. I mean, we did go through it in quite a lot of length, and it went back to Cabinet, and it has already been decided and formally agreed that it is going to remain as it is, which is access only to vehicles when necessary. So, for my understanding, unless anybody feels differently, we don't actually have to need to take any action. Are we happy to put that forward? No action needed? Yeah? Okay. Then I think we can formally agree that that's what will happen. Now, Clark, will we allow the member of the public to know that?
Yes, we can advise.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much. Okay, so that's that one done. Now we go to the real. Now we've done the starter, now we can go to the meat of the meeting, the main course, as we say, Ross. In front of me, we have the officers. We have Ross Price, we have Carl Tuick, and we have Deborah Howells, and we have the Cabinet member, Catherine Maybe, and this is all about flooding. Now, for obvious reasons, it's a very touchy subject, very fluid subject, pardon the pun, and also it's very relevant because as we speak, we're in the middle of a heat wave, which really and truly does point to how our climate is changing and how we really do need to respond to it all. And the flood, we seem to go from one extreme to the other. So it's really important to hear everything Ross has to say and the team have to say and what we can do. So without further ado, please, Ross, would you like to take control and do your presentation?
Great, thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. So here today, just to provide a recap on where we are with the local flood risk management strategy following the public consultation. The quick presentation will be in two parts. It'll be a quick recap on the content of the local strategy, what's in it and the purpose of it, and then we'll get to the consultation process and the outcomes and the relevant changes that were made to the strategy. So to recap then, in terms of what a local strategy is, under the Flood and Water Management Act 2010, Monmouthshire County Council was established as the lead local flood authority for its area. The Act requires all 22 lead local flood authorities in Wales to produce, develop, maintain, apply and monitor a local flood risk management strategy for their area. Different risk management authorities in Wales are responsible for different sources of flood risk. As a lead local flood authority, Monmouthshire County Council are responsible for local flood risk, which is defined as flood risk from surface water runoff, groundwater and ordinary watercourses, which generally tend to be the smaller watercourses. This local strategy focuses on these local sources of flood risk within Monmouthshire, but also acknowledges and considers other forms of flood risk, including main rivers, sea and sewers, and the associated responsible risk management authorities. It's important to note that local strategies do not cover flooding from main rivers in detail. Natural Resources Wales and not Monmouthshire County Council are the relevant risk management authority for flooding from main rivers in Monmouthshire, such as the Esk, Wye and the Mono, that caused significant damage across the county during Storm Dennis, Bert and Claudia. Consideration to main river flood risk is contained in detail within NRW's own flood risk management plan. We published our first local strategy in 2013, setting out the overarching approach in managing flood risk. Alongside our local strategy, Monmouthshire County Council published a flood risk management plan in 2016. Our flood risk management plan developed the objectives and high-level measures outlined in our local strategy into a more detailed plan for managing flooding in our communities. This document is our second local strategy. Whilst we have previously published our local strategy and flood risk management plan separately, this new local strategy integrates the two documents into one. This reduces complexity and enables us to communicate and manage local flood risk more effectively. The flood risk management plan is referred to as the flood action plan within this new local strategy. The local strategy will explain how flooding from local sources will be managed across Monmouthshire, consistent with the objectives, measures and related policies and legislation set out in the national strategy. Once published, this local strategy will be reviewed within 2 years of the publication of the next national strategy, and the flood action plan will be reviewed and updated every 3 years or as required. So how do we assess flood risk? So flood risk across Monmouthshire has been assessed on a catchment basis using identified strategic flood risk areas. These strategic flood risk areas mirror the catchments of larger watercourses and break down the county into suitable areas whereby the local flood risk can be considered in a holistic way along with all other sources of flooding. This approach also helps to highlight areas at greatest risk and their interconnected potential for mitigation on a catchment basis, whilst also maximising the potential for identifying flood risk management opportunities across a range of lead local flood authority responsibilities and duties. The largest river catchments of the Usk and the Wye cover the majority of the county. Therefore, to avoid overly large strategic flood risk areas, these catchments have been broken down to include their largest tributaries. In the south, due to the location of the main settlements and the two catchments being comparatively small in area, the Nethen Brook and the West Pilreen catchments have been combined to form one strategic flood risk area. This has resulted in 9 strategic flood risk areas as shown. Okay. So how is local flood risk managed? So the local strategy sets out our flood risk management objectives, measures and actions. These 3 groupings provide different levels of detail and how flood risk will be managed. So the objectives are overarching targets of outcomes or flood risk management during or beyond the local strategy cycle. They are statements of the local authority ambition for flood risk management, and they are specific to the local authority but linked to the national strategy objectives. The measures are broad activities and ways of working to meet the objectives. Typically, they apply to the local authority rather than specific communities, locations within it. They are loosely time-bound and are measurable at a high level with indicative costs and benefits. And then we have the actions, which are specific tasks, activities or initiatives planned and tracked to meet the measures. They are reviewed and updated on a regular basis, reporting on progress every 3 years. They're short, medium and long-term with clearly defined outputs and outcomes, and they're typically location-specific within the local authority area. So in total, within the strategy, we have 8 objectives, which tie in with the objectives within the national strategy. There are 18 measures in total, which are grouped into 6 themes. And then we have a county-wide flood action plan containing 38 actions. And in addition to that, we have flood action plans that have been developed for each of the 9 strategic flood risk areas. So within the flood action plan, which sets out the local flood risk management actions required to meet the objectives and measures identified in the local strategy. These actions include those that have already commenced, as well as new and future actions identified to help manage the risk of flooding from local sources. A total of over 90 actions have been developed. These are detailed in the county-wide action plan, as well as the individual action plans for each of the 9 strategic flood risk areas, to ensure local sources of flood risk at a community scale are considered. The proposed actions will be delivered over the short 1 to 3 years, medium 4 to 6, and long-term 6+ years, and will have clearly defined measurable outcomes. So each of the action plans includes a local description, a history of flooding, details of flood risks of pluvial, fluvial and groundwater, and the proposed actions relevant to that area that MCC plan to undertake. A list of the relevant flood action plans is shown on the screen there. So we have the Monmouthshire-wide flood action plan, and then action plans for each of the strategic flood risk areas, namely the Hondy, the Monnow, the Trothy, the Wye, the Olway, the Usk, Mountain Brook, Nethen Brook and West Pilreen, and the Milreen. So going on to the consultation, the Flood and Water Management Act requires all lead local flood authorities to consult with relevant risk management authorities that may be affected by the strategy and also the general public. Right at the start of this process, the revised local strategy and flood action plan was informed by the results of a non-statutory public engagement exercise in the form of an online survey, which was undertaken prior to the drafting of the revised local strategy between the 25th of July 2023 and the 28th of August 2023. The online survey received 90 responses to 19 questions, which focused on individuals' awareness, knowledge and understanding of flood risk. The statutory consultation survey was hosted on the Let's Talk platform for a period of 8 weeks, from the 1st of August 2025 to the 26th of September 2025. The flood risk management team also hosted public drop-in sessions in the community hubs around the county. They were full-day sessions between the hours of 9 AM and 5 PM at Abergavenny, Monmouth, Usk, Chepstow and Caldicot. So in terms of the outcome, the total number of attendees to the public drop-in sessions was 36. And each of those 36 individuals had the opportunity to discuss the content of the strategy and also their general concerns and views of local flood risk management with myself and another member of the flood risk management team. The statutory consultation received a total of 80 responses, comprising 65 online survey responses, 10 paper survey responses and 5 email responses. As a result of the overall feedback received, over 20 amendments and additions to the local strategy and 30 amendments and additions to the flood action plan have been made. The main amendments to the local strategy are as follows. So we've added additional references to relevant pieces of legislation and other strategies and policies. The statutory consultation details have been updated. Additional wording has been added on the psychological impacts of flooding. The internal drainage district and reservoir flooding lines have been added to the sources of flooding figure. Additional links have been added to the relevant sources of information. The climate change section has been updated with additional detail and links. The reference to flooding to public rights of way has been added, and statutory consultation outcomes have also been added. And then in addition, references to Storm Claudia and the resulting flooding that occurred in November last year has also been added. The main amendments to the flood action plan are as follows. So we have 2 new actions in the county-wide Monmouthshire flood action plan, 3 new actions in the Mono plan, 1 new action in the Trothy plan, 3 new actions in the Usk plan, and 4 new actions and additional catchment detail has been added to the Mountain Brook flood action plan following some valuable feedback from some residents in that catchment. References to Storm Claudia and the resulting flooding that occurred in November 2025 has also been added. The Habitats Regulations Assessment has been updated with 3 amendments, and the Strategic Environmental Assessment has also been updated with 15 amendments following comments received from Natural Resources Wales. The details and breakdown of the amendments to the local strategy and the flood action plan can be found in the appendices to the report for this committee. So in terms of an indicative timeline to publication, just going back to last year in June 2025, there was a cabinet briefing on the purpose and the content of the local strategy. We then completed the draft documents, both the strategy and the environmental assessments. We then came to this Place Scrutiny Committee in July 2025 to present the final draft of the strategy prior to public consultation. As I've mentioned, in August 2025 and September 2025, we held that public consultation over a period of 8 weeks. The programme to publication was delayed then, unfortunately, due to the widespread flooding across Monmouthshire last winter, and all of our staff resource having to be diverted to respond to those devastating flood events. So the strategy was then updated in the spring this year following all the comments received from the consultation. So on the 23rd of June, we provided an update to the senior leadership team. On the 14th of July, we provided a further update to Business Cabinet. And here we are today on the 30th of July, back at Place Scrutiny Committee to give an update on the results of the consultation and the subsequent amendments that would be made. We hope after this we will be able to go back to Cabinet in September with a report to be considered to adopt the local strategy and submit to Welsh Government for approval. And then following that, we will make that submission to Welsh Government of the strategy and accompanying reports for ministerial approval. So to quickly summarise, the new local strategy has been developed using a national template developed by local authorities, Welsh Local Government Association and Welsh Government, thus ensuring consistency across county boundaries. It sets out a clear direction for the future management of local sources of flood risk in Monmouthshire. It promotes working on a catchment scale using natural flood management and nature-based solutions to reduce flood risk. It identifies further opportunities for community engagement to support flood awareness, preparedness and resilience. It identifies opportunities for collaborative working with other risk management authorities and organisations, including supporting Natural Resources Wales in the management of flooding from main rivers. It delivers on the requirements of the Flood and Water Management Act 2010. It has been produced in accordance with and complements Welsh Government's National Flood Strategy. And finally, it will support the delivery of the flooding related actions in the Council's community and corporate plan. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Ross. Now, before we open it to the floor, I just wanted to know, Carl wanted to add anything. You're all happy? Okay, so we can go now to questions. Now I'll open it to the committee first, and then afterwards we'll go to all the other councillors, okay? So, first off, committee, any questions? Your hands up. Old system back again. I get so confused with this system. Okay. Councillor Brown and Councillor Stevens wish to speak.
Don't use the mic on Teams, just use the mic in the room.
Is Councillor Stevens on? Yeah, I know I will. I know. Yeah. I was going to say. Yeah. Okay, Councillor Stevens, we'll take you afterwards. We'll just do all the committee members first, okay? Because you're not on the committee as such.
On the committee.
Is she?
Yes.
Is she? I just checked that. I got told no. I do apologise. Right.
That's okay.
Councillor Stevens.
Thank you. And thank you for that very thorough presentation. Thank you, Chair. Looking on page 27, table 8, and my area, most of my area is on the top of the leaderboard, with the number of residential properties and non-residential properties in the low-risk areas of Neddenbrook and West Pilreen in Caldicot. There are 371 residential and 46 non-residential. The residential numbers would be the lower housing areas around Pill Road and Pill Row. Also, it would include Castle Lodge housing estate. When the flooding takes place in the castle grounds, the floodwater has got nowhere to go. The non-residential would be the businesses on the lower part of the Severn Bridge Industrial Estate. These properties in the past have had substantial flooding and causing loss of trade to businesses and trauma to the residents in their homes, and having a river almost flowing inside and outside their properties. The flooding was caused due to the sluice gates not operating near Deep Weir. The clue is in the name, Deep Weir. My questions to the panel are, who owns the land that the sluice gates are located? Is it MCC or NRW? Because this argument has been going on for years, who owns the area? And is there an ongoing maintenance plan in place for the sluices gate and the areas around it? Thank you.
Gentlemen, Ross, would you like it?
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor. Yes, obviously we're well aware of the flooding that occurred there in that area previously, and we produced a separate Section 19 report following the, I think it was the storm Jorge around that time for that area. And one of the actions was to look into the ownership of that, the large trash screen that's down on the M4 culvert at the bottom of the Netherton Brook before it goes out to the estuary. So the Netherton Brook is a main river. Part of it is managed by Natural Resources Wales downstream of the castle grounds. They undertake routine maintenance there. Usually between, I think, towards the end of the year, sort of November time, to clear the banks of vegetation, etc. There has been accusations in the past that some of that debris has been left on the banks of the watercourse, and then during flood events that's been washed down and then trapped on the screen and then caused subsequent flooding. So after the previous flood event that I mentioned and now a Section 19 report, we've had detailed discussions with Natural Resources Wales and National Highways. So National Highways actually own that and maintain that grid on the culvert. We made recommendations for them to put a camera on that trash screen to aid monitoring. We as local authority in Monmouthshire, we've got a number of cameras on our key assets. They didn't go down that road in the end, but they certainly did change their inspection and maintenance regimes on that trash screen. So they've now got a much more robust maintenance and inspection regime for that trash screen, during peace time, so to speak, but also during inclement weather. So when there's an amber warning, I believe that they'll go and routinely check that trash screen to make sure that there's no issues. In addition to that, I believe one of the main issues during that flood was that the pressure on that screen was as such that it couldn't be lifted. There's a hydraulic lifting mechanism on that trash screen, but because of the debris and the pressure of the water on there, it just could not lift. So one of our recommendations to them was to have a mechanical means of operating that, a manual means of operating that screen in case a similar occurrence would happen. So they have put in those measures in place as well now. So if the same were to occur, they can lift that screen in an emergency situation. And then finally, in addition to that, Natural Resources Wales, I believe, have amended their maintenance practices by way of they don't leave that debris on the banks of the Netherton Brook. Now they take them away, so there's less risk of that debris being washed down and blocking that screen. So,
can I just come back? How regular is it checked, and how long would it take if there was rubbish there? How long would it take to be cleared? Have you any idea? Thank you.
I don't know the exact timings. I can certainly find out from them. We will have it documented, and then we can go back and check with them. I can certainly get back to you on that. I believe it would be along the lines of a weekly check during the winter, and then if there were sort of amber rain warnings, then they would go and check it and probably have routine checks during that rainfall event to make sure that it is clear. But I can get the exact details for you if you would like.
Thank you very much. And it's very interesting because there'll be other councillors from that end that will be interested in that fact. Okay, Councillor Newell has hand up.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, colleagues. That was a 650-page report, so that took some doing. So, that's no easy task. So well done to you all. And a lot of my points are based on the fact that it is a 650-page report, and our residents might struggle or won't have the patience to read all of it. So what I'm going to be looking for as a county councillor, especially someone whose ward was deluged, Monmouth Town Ward, and was Councillor Garrett with his own troubles at his home. My inbox is full of what are we going to do about the flooding. Okay. So really a question I've asked before. I know the Section 19 report is going to be coming out hopefully later this year. So that's really good news. So I know that will report specifically on Skemfrith, Monmouth, Osbaston. So we look forward to that report to see what we can learn. My first point, back to the 650 pages here, is there a concise version of the report that we can communicate to residents? Because I think that's going to be important moving forward, because they are anxious, they are scared, and Councillor, maybe you're in Monmouth as well. You know that residents are really, really worried. I know we've got this heat wave now, as mentioned earlier, but so I think if there's a user-friendly, concise report that demonstrates the positive actions we're taking as a local authority, because at the moment I think our residents don't see what we're doing, and I think it's important that we start getting that message out there, if that's something that colleagues are able to do. Drop-in sessions, I noticed that we did half a dozen or so drop-in sessions last August and September, and I wonder whether it's worth having another group of drop-in sessions in view of what happened last winter. And again, those residents that turned up could turn up again and ask questions about changes we've made and improvements we're making and consultations and chats that are going on. This is all about communication and telling the public what we're doing. So I wondered whether colleagues can look at maybe organising more drop-in sessions to report back on last year and what we're doing for this year, if that's okay. I also note that it's going to be as late as September 26th before this goes to the Welsh Government for their support. Assuming that we get support, how long do we wait usually for actions to take place? And I was also noted, Chair, you must stop me if I'm going on too long, but we don't get the opportunity very often, so I'm grateful. There's an opportunity to work with NRW regarding this, and are they forthcoming? Because I know that the complaints I'm getting in my inbox is that NRW and other authorities aren't really helping us. And again, with communication to residents, as a local county councillor, and again with all my colleagues in the room, they think we have a magic wand and that we're responsible for absolutely everything. We're not. But the residents don't know that. And Councillor Maybe, you probably get this more than anyone, being the cabinet member. So I wondered whether there's a communication that we can do that brings the NRW, the Environment Agency, Welsh Water and MCC together to show actually who is responsible. So I've got, for example, emails, is there any way we could dredge the river? Is there anything we can build a wall? Is there a new pumping station we can build? Well, I know that the Environment Agency would be responsible for dredging the river, for example. MCC for sandbags and emergency measures. Do you know the sort of thing I'm trying to... These are all about getting things out to the public so they know who's responsible. So if they need to shout at Welsh Water, let them shout at them. That takes the pressure off you guys. But it also means that these other agencies will buck up their ideas, because we can't do it all and we're not responsible for it all. But it's a great report, 650 pages, well done. And my comments are in the very best spirit here, because I know how hard you work, guys, and you thank your team for everything they did last year for our Monmouth residents. That'd be great. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Ross, do you wish to respond?
Yes, please. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Newell. Appreciate your kind comments. There's a few points there. So in terms of the length of the report, we were very conscious to try and make it as concise as possible. There is a summary version. I think it was included in the appendices, albeit that's quite a high level overview of the content of the strategy. I think I would see it as using the contents to pull out the bits that you really want to find out information on. So there's a very detailed section, particularly on the roles and responsibilities in the main strategy document. It sets out each of the risk management authorities and what they're responsible for. So if people do have questions around that, all the information is there in the strategy. There's a couple of useful tables as well, just a tick box column and row sort of table to find out who's responsible for what. And then in terms of understanding of what the plans are within each specific area, that's one of the reasons why we are working on this catchment basis now, to try and break the county down into sizable chunks that we can identify those local sources of flood risk in particular areas. So, for instance, in your ward, people would be looking at the mono and the Y action plan, for instance, and then they can almost ignore the rest of the action plan because it won't be relevant to them. So I think it's kind of trying to learn or understand how to work your way through the document to find out the relevant pieces of information, and we're quite happy to support anybody in that if they want to come to us for information on that. In terms of the drop-in sessions, yes, we did hold those drop-in sessions, and as well as those, myself and my team have been out pretty much constantly on a weekly basis since Storm Claudia, speaking to individuals across the county. So, rather than the more formal sessions that we've held, there's been lots of individual meetings with clusters of residents and individuals as well, and that's going on. I have been speaking to Welsh Government and the Welsh Local Government Association about potentially bringing in the National Flood Forum again to do another round of exercise of public drop-in sessions. So Welsh Government have made funding available for the National Flood Forum to come into areas like Monmouth and speak to residents. The National Flood Forum have now gone back to Welsh Government with a proposal, and if that's signed off by them, then we can have further discussions with them for them to come into areas like Monmouth to discuss recovery, preparedness and resilience. So hopefully that'll be coming forward pretty soon. In terms of the Section 19 report and the feedback from Welsh Government, that's a little bit unknown at the moment. Obviously, there's been a change within Welsh Government, so we're not expecting an immediate response from Welsh Government, but we'll certainly be putting pressure on them to feedback and hopefully sign off the strategy as soon as possible. That, even though we haven't got, or perhaps we won't get the sign off immediately, it doesn't stop us from progressing the actions and recommendations within that report. So if there are recommendations in the report to have further discussions with Natural Resources Wales about certain issues and areas, then we will be progressing that despite the Section 19 report not being formally signed off. In terms of NRW and our relationship with them, we've built up very good relationships in certain areas of Natural Resources Wales over the years. There's been a few recent retirements in the flood risk team there, which have reduced their capacity, I guess. Hopefully they'll be backfilled appropriately, but I think they're in a similar boat to us, as you probably appreciate, in terms of resource as well. But in general, I would say our relationship is pretty good with the individual officers. It's that pushing them to take ownership and responsibility of the big issues that we experience here in Monmouthshire, the big main river flood events, and really highlighting the issues that we've got in our county, because they obviously have to balance those off against all the other issues across Wales in respect of main river flooding that they have to deal with. So, and then, public perception, I think, was the last point which I mentioned, with regard to who's responsible for what. So I just refer back to those tables within the strategy. There's also further information on our dedicated flood risk management web pages as well on the council website. But I would say that any member of the team is approachable at any time, really. If anybody wants to email us or speak to us, we'd be quite fortunate to build up our in-house team, and we'd be more than happy to go and speak to anybody individually or respond via email. So, okay.
Councillor Newell, anything else?
Thank you, Chair. No, I've just ticked all my notes that I've got here, and I understand it's a lot of work. So again, thank you, and let's keep working together. Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Councillor Catherine Maybe would like to speak.
Thank you. Just to say, I absolutely agree with you about the need to find ways to communicate this. It's a heavily technical report, and each community's got slightly different issues, so it's not totally clear how best to do this, but I think we really need to work closely with ward members and town councils, and hopefully we'll have the help of the National Flood Forum to do that. So, really take that on board. Thanks.
Okay, second hand up is Councillor Thomas Davis.
Good afternoon, Chair, colleagues, and thank you, officers, for bringing forward the report and for your thoughtful contributions to this committee this afternoon. I have a few questions, both on the consultation exercise itself, as well as the broader impacts of the RDLP and the development of this strategy, as well as a few questions, if I may, Chair, on its cost and deliverability. The consultation ran for 8 weeks in August of 2025, before, as Councillor Newell alluded to, the significant winter storms endured by our county in the winter of last year. Could you just reassure our residents and perhaps expand with some very tangible examples of how those lessons learned and those insights from the winter storm episodes of 2025 have been incorporated into this final strategy? Second, I can't help but note that that it's been almost 12 months since that public consultation exercise concluded. I just wonder, is that a typical sort of time frame for bringing a strategy of this nature forward for scrutiny by Place Committee? I'd welcome some words of reassurance in terms of the timelines, given it's taken 12 months to get us to this point. Jumping, if I may, to the RDLP and to future development, Chair, could officers give me some sense of what consideration has been given to the proposed RDLP and the additional pressures that future development could well place on surface water and this county's approach to managing and mitigating flood risk? Following on from that question, if I may, a question or two on the cost and deliverability. Now, the strategy helpfully categorises, Chair, a number of actions as requiring existing resource, low, medium or high resource to deliver. What I didn't get a sense of from this report, however, was the cumulative financial impacts on this county of delivering the suite or the range of potential interventions proposed. So could officers provide an estimated total cost of delivering the interventions in full as proposed in this strategy? And I suppose related to that, as part of that discussion around cost and deliverability, the report makes a number of assumptions in terms of there being Welsh Government grant funding forthcoming to aid, to facilitate and to support some of those more high resource intensive interventions. Now, these are competitive, I imagine, grant applications subject to approval by Welsh Government. Again, I think I've previously asked this at a Place Committee meeting. How confident are officers that the required grant funding will be in place from Welsh Government? And I guess by means of further reassurance, what has been our track record as a county of successfully leveraging and securing flood and coastal erosion risk management funding and the sorts of small-scale works grants that this strategy seems to place an awful lot of faith in terms of delivering the range of interventions that are set out in this very thoughtful and considered report? I think there's plenty there for officers to initially respond to, but I may have a few follow-ups, Chair, so I'm happy to pause and to give back my time to officers to respond to those in the first instance. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. I think that's probably a wise thing because I was writing stuff down and couldn't keep up. Ross, are you okay? Ready? After you.
Yes. Thank you, Councillor, for the questions. In terms of feedback from the strategy, it was originally developed on the basis of our sort of local knowledge, all the issues that we're aware of, and also the very detailed assessment that we did using things like the NRW flood maps, communities at risk register, etc., to highlight the main areas at flood risk, and also breaking it down into individual properties and assets. The feedback that we had is, I think I've highlighted in the report where the changes have been made to each individual flood action plan. So there's been additional specific actions in a number of the action plans. A good example is the Mountain Brook. I think we had a very good discussion with one of the residents at one of the drop-in sessions who highlighted to us a big issue with regard to flooding from the Mountain Brook itself, which affects the numbers of properties, but also quite a considerable amount of overland runoff as well, which does affect properties. And when we've looked at it, we do see potential there for a natural flood management scheme. So one of the actions, an action has been included in the strategy as a direct response to that feedback that we had to look at the potential for a natural flood management scheme in that location. In terms of the time frame, I'm not sure myself about typical time frames for reporting back following the original Place Scrutiny Committee and consultation. Obviously, we had a significant flooding events, not just Storm Claudia, but other flooding events throughout the winter from sort of November till February, March time, which had to divert all of our team's attention. So essentially, this had to be parked, for the want of a better description, such was the severity of those flood events that we had to divert all of our attention to that, which, yes, unfortunately it did delay the time frame for us coming back to police scrutiny, but I guess in my view that was unavoidable. In terms of the cost and deliverability, I haven't got any exact figures to hand. I can certainly come back on the cumulative cost for this. I guess it breaks it down into two elements. One is the statutory duties that we've got to deliver anyway as lead local flood authority, but the additional actions that we've identified, looking at the specific actions within each of the communities and strategic flood risk areas. And it's been drafted on a basis of realism. We haven't put in anything in there that we don't think we've got internal resource to deliver, or anything that we don't think that we can apply for sort of supplementary grant funding to bolster our in-house resource to deliver on those revenue type activities. And that leads on to the Welsh Government grant funding. Yes, it is heavily reliant on Welsh Government grant funding. That is our main source of funding to deliver flood schemes. The small scale works grant was developed approximately, I guess, six to 8 years or so ago, on the back of feedback from local authorities. We've got the experience and local knowledge whereby we know where the local flood risks are, and we know that there are potentially quick wins, quick solutions that can quickly solve problems that don't need to go through the very, very long business case procedure. So that's where the small scale grant came from, and I'm pleased to say that every year since then, every application that we've put in has been approved. It's obviously out of my hands in terms of the future of that grant and whether or not that'll be around for the foreseeable, but I can see that there's certainly no indication at the moment that grant won't be available to us, and the strategy has been written on the basis that we will be able to continue to at least apply for those grants to deliver the small scale works that we've identified within the capital small scale works that we've identified within the strategy. I'd have to pass to a colleague for the question on the RLDP. What I can say about the surface water management within future developments is that is now all covered by the SUDS approving body, which falls within my team as well. So there is a technical approval process now for all new developments. They have to submit an application to us to demonstrate that their surface water proposals meet a set of quite stringent technical standards developed by Welsh Government. It works in a similar way to the planning process, but it is completely separate in terms of a technical approval. And then we either approve or refuse those applications. And then any SUDS or sustainable drainage systems which serve 2 or more properties must now be adopted by us as the local authority and the SUDS approving body. So that gives reassurance, hopefully, to residents and communities that those SUDS assets will be maintained appropriately going forward. I think that was it in terms of... Yeah, I'll have to pass over to Craig, I think, in terms of the wider question on the RLDP, if that's okay.
Afternoon, Craig. Please join us.
Good afternoon, Chair. Just wanted to help out really if I can with Councillor Davis's question, if I may, in terms of the LDP. I think Ross has covered off the main bit in terms of every single development within that RLDP will have a sustainable urban drainage system, and it will flow at a green flow rate as well. So it won't result in any additional surface water runoff than the existing rates as a field. So that's new legislation which has come in, which is really, really helpful in terms of ensuring that it doesn't result in any additional surface water. I'm thinking in terms of working collaboratively, I mean, Ross's team has been working directly with the planning team and looking at every single candidate site that came in, assessing it, reviewing its acceptability. We will not be having any built form development within a floodplain, and all that surface water runoff, as I said, will be running off a green flow rate, so it'll be exactly the same as a green field ultimately. So when the application does come in, when we get into the detail in terms of, I mean, this is if that the LDP goes forward, obviously depending on the examination, but if any development proposals come in, then any planning application will have the full details of that sustainable drainage system. Ross's team will look at that and review it and see if it's acceptable, and that will be passed on then as part of that planning decision making process for the planning committee to consider. But I can assure you that none of the developments will be looking to increase any surface water runoff, and there'll be no built development within flood zones. And all of the sites have been looked at in that respect, Councillor Davis.
Great. No, thank you, Craig. I appreciate that reassurance both from the RDLP and the earlier words of reassurance, both in terms of Welsh Government grant funding being forthcoming or expected to be forthcoming, given the success and the traction we've had historically, and the wider reassurance both in terms of the deliverability of the scheme. But I'd be grateful if you could follow up with that commitment to furnish this committee with an aggregate number for the total cost of the range of interventions proposed in this strategy. I think that would help both this committee as well as future full council meeting deliberations on this topic as it continues, as I'm sure, ahead of the winter months. It will almost certainly rear its head again. Having that aggregate number on the cumulative resource implications would be helpful. But no, thank you for your engagement. Thank you for the spirit in which you responded to the questions. No further questions from me, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, the next committee member that's put the hand up is Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I wanted to ask some questions, and thank you very much for the report and all the work that's gone into it. And I was pleased to see that you'd said on Mountain Brook, which is in my particular area, that you'd made a change in the Mynithback Itton Community Flood Plan area. Presumably that will be consultation with the local residents in that particular area that are affected, I presume, if you're going to do some sort of plan. I also noticed that under Mountain Brook 5, which is in the flood action plan, it says identify potential natural flood management options across the catchment which have potential to reduce flood risk to property and key infrastructure. In the other area, Mathern Community Council area, basically one of the infrastructures that regularly gets flooded is the Pulmeric sewage pumping station, which is on the road between Mountain Brook and a field there, and where the brook actually overflows onto the road. I did ask Welsh Water about this, but I'm not sure whether anything actually came of doing anything about that particular issue. And the other issue is also that in Mathern itself, regularly there is a flood area when we get heavy rain under the bridge, which effectively cuts off one half of the Mathern village, and obviously causes problems for those properties that can't actually stuck in, and they can't go out and get essentials. Previously, I think the community council had a boat, but they haven't got a boat anymore. And I think more recently, some youths went down to clear the drains there. But obviously, there are issues of flooding to do with other parts of the council as well, like highways and how often the drains are cleared and so forth. So, or if other areas need other drains. And there doesn't seem to be a great deal in the report about highways and the impact of flooding on roads, because obviously that can also impact properties or make places impassable. And I just wondered if you could comment on that. The other thing is I think when the report came in July 2025, I did suggest that it would be helpful to have some links to Natural Resources Wales flood information on particular fields and so forth, so that people could look at those. Because obviously, just talking about my own area in Pulmeric and Mathern area, there's certain fields that regularly flood, but they're very useful that they do flood, because if houses were built on there, then basically water would be diverted to existing households. I know you look at sustainable drainage and so forth, but how much is looked at, if you build something, it effectively can divert water in the wrong direction. And I think, I don't know whether that is necessarily taken account of. On planning, one of the things I was concerned about with the RLDP is that we used to have a policy basically, stressing the importance of flooding, and that was actually taken out, compared to the current LDP and this new RLDP, because of the fact they said, oh, there's TAN 15, and we follow, the actual national policy on it. But my concern is that if it isn't actually mentioned as a policy and an objective within the RLDP, then it's not a reminder to people that, there is TAN 15 and that local flooding is a very important issue. So, I am concerned about that particular thing. Taking it on a much wider level, one of the things that was mentioned previously was the idea that, farmers could be digging ditches and so forth to actually ensure that sort of lower areas or towns or whatever weren't flooded. And I wanted to know, whether the Welsh Government were looking at that particular issue and, providing any resources for that, because that seems a sensible thing to do. And then on a more local level, how much is the blocking of culverts and so forth? How much does that impact, how particular areas, how the water flows? Because I know in my area, sometimes people come up with concerns about local culverts being blocked by trees and vegetation and so forth. So I think my colleague Councillor Newell mentioned about how it sort of covers different agencies like MCC, the Fire Authority, because they're actually involved in the rescue work on flooding. But also it's not just sort of different agencies, it's also within the council that there's different things that interact in terms of highways, planning, farming and so forth. So, that's quite a wide area, but I just wondered how sort of some of the wider issues I didn't necessarily see was in this document. It might be because it's a local one as opposed to a national strategy, looking at things like blocking of, how farmers could aid with ditches and so forth, because I've seen news articles in other areas how they've said that it has improved the flood resilience in their particular area. Thank you.
Thank you. Ross?
Thank you, Councillor Brown. In terms of the couple of issues you raised at the start, the Pulmeric pumping station and the flooding under the bridge in Matham, we're aware of those issues. I think there's ongoing what we call land drainage investigations into those to try and understand exactly what's going on. We haven't listed every single land drainage issue that we're currently working on or have worked on within the strategy, because the document would be even bigger then, so it's but I can certainly update you on those 2 points. I know we've had correspondence about the Welsh Water pumping station previously, so I can update you on where we are with those. In terms of the highway drainage, so the way it really works is that we as the flood team or the Lead Local Flood Authority, we usually take receipt of a complaint or a query about a flooding issue, and then if through our investigation we identify that there's a particular issue with the highway drainage, then we'll contact Highways and ask for that drainage system to be cleared. We usually undertake quite a detailed survey as well, so we can plot all the drainage on our asset database, which is growing day by day, week by week and year by year. So gradually and over time we've now got a much better and more comprehensive drainage asset database, so we've got a better understanding of where those assets are and the size and condition of those assets, albeit there's still a huge amount of work to do around that area. In terms of information from Natural Resources Wales, there are links within the strategy to the flood maps, so and their website as well. So they do have quite a good website that you can go on and see all of the flood maps. So there are links within the strategy that you can use to go and see where the flood risk can be expected. There's also links on our web pages as well to the same maps as well. In terms then of farmers digging ditches, I think that's a very specific, very specific question. Sometimes digging a ditch can be the problem, can solve the problem, sorry, but quite often it can cause additional issues, because if you're collecting water in a ditch, that water then will go elsewhere, and then you have to think about, well, where is that water going, and will that also increase flood risk elsewhere? There are things like the Sustainable Farming Scheme, which have recently come in, which is there for farmers to undertake certain types of work, such as hedgerow planting and buffer strips, to try and reduce flood risk. I don't know if that extends to actually digging ditches. I'm not too sure, but quite typically, and we've engaged with farmers previously, if we go out and undertake an investigation and we identify that, well, actually, if a ditch was cut into that field, it would save a couple of properties from flooding, we can then work with the landowner then to see if A, they're willing to do it off their own back as a goodwill gesture, or B, that we could potentially tap into the small scale works grant from Welsh Government then to actually pay for the work to be undertaken. In terms of building in fields and then diverting that water away, where actually, yes, obviously some fields we see them underwater, and some people see that as a bad thing, but other people, we see that as a good thing, because it's the natural floodplain, and that's where we want the water in fields rather than in housing developments. But you're quite right, if a development were to be built in a certain area and it was to divert some water, albeit that would be quite rare now with the planning policies that are in place, because it would be likely that field would be a designated flood zone and they wouldn't be allowed to build in that. But if you are diverting water through when you build a new development, there's quite often developers will have to demonstrate that they're providing something called compensatory storage, which you might well have heard of. So if they're diverting a certain volume of water away from a floodplain, they have to then provide the equivalent or more volume somewhere else. So they may have to dig a basin or lower a field, for instance, to allow the water to drain out to that area because of the loss of storage in the area that they're building. That would be covered through the planning process and the flood consequence assessments, and would be assessed by Natural Resources Wales and my team as well through the planning consultation process. And then block culverts is a significant issue, particularly in the rural areas of Monmouth. One day a culvert can be running perfectly fine, and the next day it can block and cause significant issues. What we have done through the expansion of my team over recent years, we've now got a proactive land drainage inspection list, as we call it. So I think there's about 30 or 35 sites on there now, whereby we'll proactively go out and inspect these locations, the ditches or the culverts, prior to winter, usually twice a year, typically September, October, and then again in January, to make sure that there's no issues sort of building up in those areas, and to hopefully maintain the flow through those assets. So that's proved quite successful over recent years. We've a particular number of regular areas where we've had flooding issues have certainly reduced in recent years, because we're keeping a closer eye on them as well, and liaising with the riparian owners to make sure that they clear the water courses as well that are leading into those assets. In terms of the RLDP and the flooding policy which has been taken out of that, I might have to divert to Craig, if that's okay. Craig, thank you.
Craig?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Brown, for the question. I think there was two questions there on development, and I know Ross has just answered the one there with regards to displacement of water. I think one of the other key things there to mention, particularly in flood zones, is that one of the planning policies is that you have to evidence that it's not resulting in flooding elsewhere. So any new development needs to evidence that it's not going to do that flooding elsewhere as well. So that's one of those key aspects in terms of displacement of water. In terms of the replacement local development plan, yes, that policy has been taken out, but that doesn't mean that flooding has been sort of reduced in scale at all. And whilst government guidance is that we don't duplicate policies that are already significant weighted in national policy. So in Wales, we have a three-tier planning system, which is national planning policy, then strategic development policy, which is the regional policy, and then local planning policy. So what that is what government guidance is suggesting is that that national level policy is the heavily weighted policy. The technical advice note 15, which has just been updated, outlines all the key planning policy framework the development needs to be looked at, and that's the policy that we refer to, and that's the policy that will be utilised in all development, which says no development on a vulnerable floodplain ultimately. In terms of that being missed. I certainly don't think that will be the case. NRW will comment on flood applications in flood zones. We'll be consulting with Ross's team in terms of development proposals. I can't see that being the case. I appreciate that Councillor Brown in terms of raising that concern, and we do have to monitor all applications that we allow within a flood zone to Welsh Government as well. So there are checks and balances in place to ensure that policy, that key policy criteria, isn't missed at all. And as I said, this will be detailed and considered through the examination now through the LDP as to whether any additional policies needed. But as I said, Welsh Government guidance is that policies at a national level shouldn't be duplicated at a local level. So that's the reason why it's not in there.
Councillor Brown?
Yes, thank you for that answer, Ross. And I'm pleased to hear about you having a list of like 35 areas of culverts, because that's taking a much more proactive approach. And it's the same if you've got your list of assets that are going to cause problems when we know locally that road will get flooded near Mountain Brook Lodge whenever we have heavy rain, and we know that there's a likelihood that under the bridge will get flooded and cut off one half of the village in Mathen. So we know that from a local knowledge point of view. In terms of planning, thank you for the answer to that, Craig. And I know that there is this idea that you shouldn't duplicate national policies, but I still think that when people look at planning, they tend to look at currently at the LDP, or when it's replaced the RLDP. And, even if there was a policy that refers to national policy, then it would be put on the radar of local people who are actually looking at the plan, to say, because I don't think the TAN policies are always taken account of as much as the actual policies in the LDP. I appreciate that they're taken account of by the planning officers, but I'm talking about the the community consultation and what the communities say, because they tend to look at the policies within the LDP as opposed to the TAN policies, which I know you've got to apply anyway, but they may miss out points on the TAN policies because there's no reference to the national policies. So I don't think it's duplicating it. What it is just reminding the importance of the flooding side and building. I mean, that's just my opinion. Thank you.
Okay. Ross? Anything? Do you want to add anything?
No, just one further point, just for information, really, as well as that 35 site proactive inspection list. We've also got a number of cameras around the country, around the county that we deployed a number of years ago now, and they're on critical assets. So we've got 24/7 access to those cameras, and we can, as a flooding event comes in and a rainfall event comes in, we can monitor the river level and the watercourse levels around those assets, but also the level of debris that's building up on those trash screens or culverts, which means then we can call our operations crews out a lot quicker then. So we are trying to be more and more proactive as proactive as we can be. So
okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I believe Councillor Strong would like to have a speak. Yeah?
Thank you, Chair. I've only got a couple of things I want to raise. And it really is sort of touching on the sort of being proactive in prevention. I think we've come a long way in the last 3 years, and I want to thank Ross and his team for what they've been doing actually to really sort of understand the flooding along Sevenside, and particularly the Country Park, Castle Lodge and the trading estate. So I just want to say a big thank you to the team. And I also want to make other elected members aware that I know that I contacted you when there was a big sort of tree trunk going down the Nedden, and I was concerned that it was going to sort of block up one of those either the trash screen or some of the sort of tunnels along there, and was given the number to contact NRW. And I was amazed because within sort of hours I had a phone call, and they were out the next day. And so they used 3 words, and they were out and they moved it. So I just want to thank you for that, and I've also let residents know along that area as well. So that's great. So I haven't really got a question about that, but I just want to say a big thank you to your team. But my question really is, so we've talked about prevention and sort of being proactive. What happens when a flood event happens? And have we got a scheme within the Monmouthshire area to alert residents of the potential dangers and potential things that they can do to mitigate some of the flooding issues? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Strong, for the question. And thank you for your kind comments as well. I'll pass those on to the team. In terms of what happens when a flood happens, we've got our dedicated, there's various sources of information. There's our dedicated flood risk management pages on our website. There's a number of leaflets on there as well about what to do prior to a flooding event and what to do during a flooding event as well as a source of information. I must say Natural Resources Wales website as well is also very good now. There's an awful lot of information around again what to do during, before and after a flood event there. In terms of preparedness, obviously there's the floodline service, the flood warning service of Natural Resources Wales that people are able to sign up to. That's really the go-to to, if you are within a flood risk area, sign up to that service, and you will get warnings via text message or an email. But really the key thing for that, I think, is to understand that flood warning service, understand the actions that you need to take when there is a flood alert, but then also when there's a flood warning and a severe warning. I think there's a misunderstanding about that service. People do tend to wait for the most severe of warnings to come through before taking action, whereas actually when you read the guidance from Natural Resources Wales, when a flood warning is issued, then that is the time to take action because flooding is expected. So I think in general then when my team go out and they speak to individuals who have been flooded or have come close to flooding, we pass on as much knowledge as we can of where to find this sort of information. And I think going forward, one of the key parts of the strategy as well is to look to develop more community flood plans as well. So people are aware of the flood risk in their area, right down to the level of detail around a single gully. You know, if that one gully can block, then potentially it could flood a number of houses. So it's those community flood plans will hopefully progress as time goes by now following the completion of the strategy. And residents can become more aware of flood risk in their local areas and where to find out that information. So.
Can I just thank Ross for that? And I know that we've talked about sort of flood risk plans and sort of local sort of things. So so I look forward to the strategy going forward, and thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I'm on the committee, so I get to ask a question now. Sorry. As you well know, Ross, that my ward is affected pretty much every time it gets flooded. It doesn't take a lot, as likewise for Skenthrift. So we attended the meeting not that long ago where we had NRW and we had yourselves there. And there's the conversation, and we have briefly touched on it, about the NRW doing inspections to each house, or surveys, I think that's the correct term, surveys on each house. And I raised it then and I raise it again now. And I know it's not our responsibility or bag at this point, but it seems that we are likely to face flooding again this winter at some point, or at least my residents will. And we will not have that survey in place and no changes made as such. I find that disappointing. I know it's not your responsibility. I was wondering if you could shed any light on any of those thoughts. And also, we also talked at that meeting about organising training to help residents. And it won't be and this is a point that the residents made, it won't be the residents that actually get flooded, but responsible people within the community who can action a road closure. And we need to do formalised training to achieve that, because that is a big problem in my ward, is that people just drive through the floodwater and cause more havoc without intentionally doing so. I don't think for a moment however they don't quite grasp what is happening. Can you follow through any of those questions, please? Thank you.
Sorry, I'm going to have to talk with my back to you here.
I understand.
Yes, a couple of weeks ago we met with residents of Forge Road, the MP and Natural Resources Wales. So yes, they gave a positive update, I think, in terms of they are now progressing with a property flood resilience scheme for the residents. We've produced 2 Section 19 reports, one after the 2019 flood event and one after the 2020 flood event, both recommending that Natural Resources Wales undertake an initial assessment to consider mitigation measures at Forge Road. So it was pleasing to hear now that they are coming forward with a scheme. I believe that the surveys, the individual property surveys, will be undertaken in December this year with a view to installing the property flood resilience measures in August next year, next summer. So that could potentially include flood barriers, flood doors, sealed air bricks, and the whole suite of property flood resilience measures, which will give them more resilience. And I stress the word resilience. It's not a flood prevention scheme, albeit the resilience measures can prevent flooding in lower magnitude events. I know a number of properties in Forge Road do have property flood resilience measures already in place, and unfortunately Storm Claudia overtopped those defences and the properties were flooded throughout. So, but like I said, I think that is a positive step forward, and we can certainly put as much pressure on NRW as we can, and also support them in delivering that scheme as quick as possible, which, like I said, is hopefully a positive going forward. In terms of the road closure, yes, there's a number of locations around Monmouthshire which we're currently looking at, which do need more formalised road closure plans. Skenfrith and Forge Road being 2 of them, and 1 or 2 others as well. So we're currently developing those plans that can be kept on shelf and pulled out when we hit the trigger levels and needing to close those roads, and then a suitable road closure arrangement can be put into place. And yes, we do have plans then to support residents by hopefully training some suitable people to help us with the deployment and maintenance of those traffic management measures, both in Skenfrith and Forge Road, which should help make sure that the road closures are put out in a timely fashion, and then they're there for the duration of the flood event to hopefully stop people driving through and creating those bow waves, which can be a particular problem for certain residents and properties. So work in progress on both of those, which yes, we'll certainly keep our foot down on both of those elements of work.
Great, thank you. A few other thoughts from that. The drains get blocked. It's one of those things that happen, and I know we've talked about other people and culverts and things, and we need to have those lists, but I feel that sometimes we do need to visit a little more often the ones that are really, and it's difficult, I understand, but we do need to be very proactive on those things. Also, we whilst we talk about the flooding, how much help can we offer farmers further up, and are we able to get into our remit to get into helping the farmers, help by doing leaky dams and slowing the flood down, the rain down, getting across, planting more, just basically those simple things. Can we implement doing some of these simple measures which could seriously help further downstream? And it just needs just some thought. And can we improvise any of that, please?
Thank you, Chair. I'll touch on the perhaps the natural flood management and the farmers first, and then perhaps Carl can come in on the highway drainage. So we are working currently with the YNS Foundation on a project called the Resilient Rivers Mono project, which is looking to incentivise upstream landowners to undertake and install natural flood management measures, particularly around improving the infiltration capability of soils. So they've identified certain areas within the catchment upstream of Forge Road and in the Hondy catchment in particular, which falls into the mono, where there is significant potential to improve the capability of the soils to hold that water through change in land management practices. So different crops, crop rotation, reduction in winter grazing to reduce compaction of soil, and hopefully that will then reduce the peaks of the flood events when we do have these significant rainfall events. So it's very much early days, but we are progressing with that scheme with partner agencies, including Natural Resources Wales and Network Rail, and hopefully others will come on board as well. We've also, I mentioned the Small Scale Works grant earlier, we've also got access to a natural flood management grant from Welsh Government, which we typically apply to on an annual basis. So this year we've got about £170,000 worth of funding to again work with the YNS Foundation to work on a number of farms in that location, installing buffer strips, again changing land management practice to reduce runoff. So those schemes are ongoing as we speak, and then hopefully we can continue to identify these opportunities within the catchment and get funding to deliver those schemes. I think that was it in terms of NFM. Yep.
And from an highways drainage perspective, we secured additional funding for additional Vactor for drainage and sweeper. So we should be seeing improvements now as we go forward. Difficult when the sun is shining as it is for the last 6 weeks to understand what that impact is. But certainly we've got more investment this year going forward for those improvements in drainage across the county as our knowledge grows of where specific events happen. Forge Road, Skenfrith, we have a programme of work now that we will go out there more regularly between the leaf fall, October, November, and between the flooding that feels ever more imminent as we move forward. So yes, certainly the programme of works now will be around targeting those areas where we know have the potential for flooding more often.
Thank you very much. Right, I just that's much appreciated. I'll just revisit all the committee members, make sure they're all happy before we open it to everybody else. Are we all happy? Everybody online, all happy? Thank you very much. Right, now we'll open it up to non-committee members, and I believe Councillor Howells has got his hand up first. Councillor Howells, welcome.
Well, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Ross and Carl there for answering these questions. I think my first question has already been answered. Actually, it was it's been covered by Councillor Brown and yourself, Chair. In are we working on opportunities to help identify areas within the county for natural flood management, such as upstream storage, wetland restoration and woodland planting? But I think that's all been covered. And as you said, are we working with landowners and farmers to reduce runoff and store water? And that's good to hear that certainly in the Y and Usk it's been looked at. Obviously in Usk, I've got to ask if there's any updates of is there any further updates on the business case provided on to Welsh Government on the Woodside Flood Mitigation Scheme? And also I noticed that earlier you mentioned there was 3 new action plans for Usk that came from the consultation. Are you able to share those with us? And just finally, Councillor Strong was talking about sort of help for emergency planning, etc. Are there any sort of us Town Council, we're currently looking at our emergency plan sort of for in the event of flooding. Are there any templates or such that you could share with town and community councils? So just the the first question is obviously covered. You covered more of that, but the other two, thanks.
Ross, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Howells, for the question. Quick update on the Woodside Flood Alleviation Scheme. The business case is the full business case now is very close to being finalised. It's turned out to be a very complex scheme in terms of the hydraulics due to the very flat nature of the site. But yes, we're not far off on that. I'm hoping now within the next month or 6 weeks we will have a final business case, and then we can present that to Welsh Government going forward. So things are still moving in the right direction, albeit that it has proven to be quite a technically challenging scheme. But I think the consultants have done a really good job trying to overcome those challenges. In terms of the update to the USC action plan, there were 3 updates. One was a minor tweak to one of the actions there, but additional actions have been put in around Abergavenny and also Little Mill following the flooding that occurred during Storm Claudia. The Abergavenny action is around the Kibby Brook, which blocked and caused quite considerable flooding at that end of town. So there's an action in there to support the local community, to raise awareness about flood risk and to develop a community flood plan. So we're currently working with the residents there. We've had a number of site meetings and also the local member there as well in developing a community flood plan for that area. And coincidentally, the first draft of that came through this morning for me to review. So hopefully that will prove quite a useful template for other areas in the county, which kind of falls into your final question then around if there are any templates available. So Natural Resources Wales do have a template for a community flood plan, which I can certainly take away in action and provide a copy to you.
Thanks very much.
So we Natural Resources Wales sort of statements on community flood plans are that they're really for the community to lead on them, to pull together and maintain them. But we're certainly, as the lead local flood authority, in a position to add value, I would hope, to such plans. So we would certainly be happy to work with you on developing that plan and provide some information on that as well.
Great.
Okay.
Thanks very much for that.
Thank you. Right, going on to the next person up, and I believe that's Councillor Garrett.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ross, for the thorough report and for the work done by your staff in collating evidence from resident staff for the Storm Section 19 report on Storm Claudia. My comments are informed by the experience of my family last November. I'll never leave my vinyl collection at full level in the garage again. I salvaged the vinyl, but the sleeves were right off. So you kind of learn on the job as we did last year. Before Claudia, we had similar issues to residents in Councillor Stevens' ward with the local Monastery Road flooding due to the brook and other areas, parts of Councillor Maybe's ward around my area and Councillor Newell's as well. Those were dealt with really well by MCC staff, the pumping station. It kept the level down. You could walk around in Wellington boots and it was a few hours and then it was gone. That was 2020 and 24. Appreciate that flood preparation is a homeowner responsibility, and some of my points will probably be covered in risk assessments outside this report and the Section 19 report, but I just wanted to kind of go a few before I ask a couple of questions. We monitored flood warnings, but there was an absence of announcements, loud hailer, flood. There was the online stuff, but you've got residents who maybe haven't got a smartphone, haven't charged their phone up that night. We had, Friday night, kids come home from school with all the uniforms are in the basket downstairs. All of that was soaked up in the floodwater. Could we kind of MCC press NRW for better analogue warnings? I spoke to the people from SARA at Monmouth Town Council and said we could see them going around in their boats, but there was silence. There were drones flying, but there was no verbal communication to residents to say what's going on. Stay at home if you're vulnerable. Put a towel out of your window or something, or a sheet, and we'll come to you. I know people did get rescued who were vulnerable and they were probably already on risk assessment lists to be visited, but there was a silence and then the power went out for 2 days and we had no way of cooking food or anything or making a hot drink. So I appreciate, we were in it, living that, and that's not part of this flood plan, but it's something we need to consider for residents moving forward. We were lucky. We followed the warnings. We got our chicken Venus into the bathroom at 10 o'clock, and she would have been a goner if she'd been in the garden because it would have, the garden was flooded. So she's happily laying eggs again in our new temporary home at the moment. We now got a flood bag. We've got phone charger blocks. We've got torches, batteries, battery radio. A lot of resident, at the time, we weren't prepared for that. We went to the leisure centre on the Saturday evening because I'd luckily moved our cars into the vets next door, and they were saved. But residents in Council Norris Ward in Kingsfee, their cars were flooded, their houses were safe, but their cars were flooded. So I was wondering again, with the data that we've got from the flood mapping, could we look at building some resilience planning for where people might want to move their cars? You know, that 10 o'clock warning we kind of had that things were going to get worse. Residents, you know, in fact, my wife posted something at 2 o'clock and a guy down the road came and moved his car from next door. It was literally, the bonnet was going underwater. So, you know, maybe we could look at, in our planning as well, at where people might move their cars. We know that, you know, Kingsfee might flood next time, Elstob Way might flood. You know, what can we do about giving residents a bit of a heads up of where they can, and other parts of the county as well, where they might safely move their car to if needed. It was in the aftermath, you know, we were saved by the local community groups who provided food, but there were cases that my wife heard about where people were in flats and you know, bungalows where they literally put their foot into the water. People in Monokeep, for example, lost their shoes, couldn't really, you know, clothing. So could we have been a bit more resilient? I know this is outside of the preparation plan, but, you know, can we be a bit more resilient about getting around to residents and vulnerable people and maybe helping them out? Because getting to Shire Hall and the leisure centre wasn't easy, especially if people had lost their cars as well. Could we, for example, I think Councillor Howes just mentioned about information. The council tax letter, which we all dread, could there be a bit more information, a chance for a leaflet in there next year about, you know, flood resilience, and also we're now facing the risk of fire, so, you know, these emergencies can kind of come in all forms these days. You know, that maybe there might be some basic information we could provide, contact numbers, and just advice. I know, and it's been really good to have Flood Mary and Flood Re come to Monmouth. And it's encouraging the floral forums coming back as well. So those kind of events are really good. Hopefully we'll catch more people. I missed the first one after the flood. I didn't know that they'd been an event because we were just stuck at home for 2 weeks trying to clean up. But getting that message out to people that there things are going on that could support them, and getting to people, you know, would be helpful. Talk about the longer term aspects, especially for residents in Councillor Lucas's ward in Ford Road. It's really encouraging that they're NRW is now looking at the Build Back Better type thing, but we've struggled with our insurer. They are a Build Back Better flood policy provider, but when it comes to saying to, well, what could we do about our flooring, what could we do about our walls, what could we do about floodgates, it's been a bit of a silence. And at least if it takes NRW to do that, then that's what residents in my ward and Councillor Newell's ward probably will need as well, who are, you know, thinking, well, what are we going to do next time? It's going to happen again. You know, it was 40 years to the last one. You know, we've still got the sockets halfway at the wall in our lounge. But so clearly there was a flood, you know, back in 1980, and they'd done that afterwards. But, you know, we're having workers in at the moment putting new flooring down today. But it's not going to be flooring that's going to be salvageable if it floods again. So, you know, if it takes NRW to get involved with insurance companies and builders and, you know, doing things like the bricks, you know, the flood defensive bricks, and getting, you know, we could potentially use the perimeter of our house with floodgates, but we haven't had any conversations yet with anybody about that. So again, you know, so if MTC can support flood victims and get the message out to these national bodies as well. Just going back to the kind of the report as well, I was out with residents the other week talking about the kind of level of grass in their area, and it's been cut back, thankfully. But we also then talked about some of the drains. There's one at the back of Castle Close along Portal Road, across from the Premier Inn, and I was thinking, and there's also in Kingswood Gate, residents are concerned there because the green infrastructure management is still not in place, the company that's supposed to manage it. So there's lots of drains, but they've all got saplings growing in them now, and they're not clear. And I was wondering whether there was an opportunity, perhaps, for example, when you and your staff are in a ward, you notify the ward member and have a ward walk with them and just go through any local areas that residents are concerned about. So I'd like to have a walk around my area, around certainly Castle Close and that area, and Kingswood Gate, and look at the flood resilience there. Those areas weren't, you know, Castle Close was high enough to not be flooded, but you know, there were obviously people were concerned because they could see there was the potential if things weren't maintained. So that's something I'd like to do. So I hope that's something that we can do. And I just wondered as well about how the Section 19 report is going to inform future planning, or would that become to a scrutiny committee, and will residents get the chance to meet staff and have a talk about that as well and discuss the kind of longer term, the impact of what the flood happened and what we do in the future? Thank you.
Thank you. Ross.
Thank you, Councillor. So, yeah, in terms of flood warnings, I recall when I visited your property, you mentioned about the lack of a loud hailer and not really knowing what to do in that initial period immediately after the event. It's something that I've fed back to colleagues. So I met with our emergency planning colleagues and the fire service at Monmouth Fire Station a few weeks ago. And we were talking about the actual operational arrangements during a flood event where the deployment of pumps would be needed, etc., and where the emergency vehicles would rendezvous, etc. So that was a really good conversation, and off the back of that, now the emergency planning colleagues are developing a emergency response arrangements document for Monmouth, and in addition to that, they're also developing what will be a public information leaflet specific for that area. So things like where to take your car can be potentially included in that. So I'll take that back as a comment and feed that back in. And then it can also include information around what to do immediately after that event. Obviously, this was an unprecedented event for Monmouth Town, and I'm not aware of us ever having to arrange or establish a humanitarian aid centre before. So now that has been tried and tested, certainly information around that can also be included in that leaflet, so people are aware if there is a repeat of such an event, that these arrangements will be put in place, and this is what you need to do and where you need to find out the information. So hopefully that will go some way to improving the situation there. In terms of there's a few points there. So in terms of building resilience, moving cars, I think I just mentioned that about the leaflet. Getting to vulnerable residents, again, that was kind of the point of the meeting with the emergency services, to really highlight where the difficult locations were and the problematic areas. I mean, they did an incredible job, in my view, the emergency services, and I think they did learn an awful lot from that event. There's a couple of local officers there in the fire service who are local to the town, who know the town inside out. So I think from that learning from Storm Claudia, hopefully it won't be needed, but if it is needed, then that'll come be invaluable really during future events. So in terms of getting to those vulnerable residents, I think there'll be a lot of lessons learned from the past event. Certainly in terms of the council tax letter you mentioned and getting information out, I can certainly take that back as an action and look at that as well. We can also look at doing some comms prior to this winter as well, sharing links to further information that we mentioned earlier. So trying to be proactive in that respect, potentially around the September, October time, just before the rains do return, so people are aware where to find that information, and hopefully they can have that in their sort of back pocket, so to speak, if and when needed. So in terms of Build Back Better and the scheme, so the scheme at Ford Road and also one that they're developing up in Skenfrith is is a very bespoke sort of specific scheme for those areas which are currently undefended. I think the first stage will be for Monmouth is to consider the findings of the Section 19 report, and I think they'll potentially be focused on the existing defences in Monmouth. So whether or not what is the current standard of protection, whether or not improvements need to be made to those defences, if improvements are needed in respect of those defences and are made, then will that essentially solve the problem, or are wider mitigation measures also required in terms of property flood resilience schemes out in the Watery Lane area and the Wanstow Road area, etc. So we'll be working closely with NRW on that. Obviously the Wanstow Road watercourse and the Watery Lane watercourse are not main rivers in their entirety, so there is potential for us as lead local flood authority to look to get some grant funding for similar schemes that are being developed at Ford Road as well. But if it's going to be delivered as part of a wider scheme that NRW are promoting, then we would obviously work closely with them on that as well. So yeah, there will be a lot of work done in that area. In terms of the walkover, yes, more than happy to have that walkover, no problem at all. So yeah, just let us know, and we can get either myself or one of the team out. We can look at the drains and maybe walk it with highways as well, so we can look at the green infrastructure around the Kingswood area, which I know has been problematic because it's currently in sort of private maintenance company. But yeah, we can look at the local watercourses and the highway drainage as well, and happy to do that prior to the winter as well. So that's no issue. And then in terms of the Section 19 report, so that's currently still in progress. We've got a draft copy now, which I'm currently reviewing, so hoping to get that that draft copy back over to NRW for comment prior to publishing in the next few weeks, hopefully, and then we'll be looking at having that final copy agreed with Natural Resources Wales sort of early September time. And then we will have to discuss that with Welsh Government as well. So things are progressing quite well in that area as well. It's quite a long process, unfortunately, and this Section 19 report is slightly, well, it is different to the other ones that we've done because we're working on a catchment basis again, which ties in with the strategy. So the one Section 19 report, as Councillor Newell mentioned earlier, will cover Skenfrith, Rockfield, Ford Road and Monmouth Town as well, which is why it's taking quite some time. But it will be of value once it's published. So hopefully that answers everything. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, right, lovely. All right, so Sue Riley, hello. You'd like to ask your questions, please?
Hi, Jane. Hi, Chair. And thank you, Ross. You know, I think perhaps you've spent as much, you in your winter, you spend all your time on the flooding, and in the summer, you spend all your time writing reports about it. But thank you. It's very comprehensive. I wanted to make a point. It was made a little point earlier about the road closures and how and who manages them and the consequences of what they do. And I'm going to throw in a little anecdote or two just to make the point. When you close main roads, then sat-navs take people down the little roads. If those are already flooded, and I know you're aware of the area that I'm talking about, it's about 60 metres down Llanfair Grange Road before you get to the Pantygoetra crossroads. There is a flood many times a year there that my neighbours and I mainly manage ourselves because it just requires emptying the drain every half an hour or so, and then it will drain, but it's not lit. It floods up to, well, people of my age would call it 2.5 foot on a regular basis. And if cars are diverted it down there by their sat-navs because the main roads either side have been closed, well, last year we had a very expensive Audi floating and an awful lot of delivery drivers stuck on either side of it where they'd been diverted to, trying to get back to the Midlands. And frankly, it was awful. I know that's not a heavily populated area, but you know that that area where it pools. And if people are going to close roads, something needs to be done to stop them coming down it, but also something to stop the pooling, which wouldn't take very much. A French drain or a little bit of road levelling would mean that road was passable. But as it is, 4 or 5 times a year minimum, there is 2.5 foot of water in it. So I just want people to think about the consequences of closing major roads when that sort of thing in a totally unlit road and people just drive straight into it. So I just wondered if there is something that could be done to properly coordinate and to avoid those consequences.
Thank you, Ross.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, I'm very aware of the issues there, and the Pantygoetra actually is one of the areas that really worries me most because it's one of those areas where when it does flood, the River Usk comes across the road at 90 degrees. And I'm sure you're probably aware that cars have been pushed into hedges, etc., and they do get stranded on that road. So other areas, rivers can come up and gradually spread across the road, but at Pantygoetra it comes across as a raging torrent, and essentially the road is in the watercourse itself. I mentioned earlier, developing traffic management proposals for road closures during flood events at a number of locations, and Pantagoitra is certainly one of those. We have something in place at the moment, but I think you make a really good point about we've got to think perhaps about the wider area as well, and the diversion routes, particularly if sat-navs are taking people into these areas which are potentially very, very dangerous. So that's an action I can certainly take back to look at the current arrangements that we've got in place and make sure that if we are closing those sections, that the surrounding roads are also suitably signed during the events to make sure or try and prevent as best as possible people coming down into those areas. It's always difficult when we put out these signage, these road closures and the signage. People do ignore them, unfortunately. We've had instances up in Skenfrith where we've had cones and road closure signs across the road, and even police tape, and people still drive through it. So it is very, very difficult, but that's an action I can take back and to look at that wider area.
Could I just make the point that it is so dark when it's dark there that you can put whatever signage you like out. It's just about, if you're closing one road, you've got to do the other to stop the sat-navs redirecting. But thank you for taking the point.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Tony Newell, please.
Who's that, Chair? Tony Newell?
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Councillor Key.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, apologies, I wasn't able to make the first part of the meeting due to another one overrunning, so apologies if some of the questions I'm going to ask have been raised. Can I firstly place on record my thanks to Ross and his team for the way that he has, during the last number of years, proactively attended and responded to my queries and putting in changes into Ask. And I'm looking forward to meeting him in Little Mill on Monday. Can I ask Ross, with regards to, I regularly get asked about the integrity of flood prevention walls and banks. How often, and also actually Uskbridge, how often do they get checked, and whose responsibility is it in terms of, so for example, the main flood wall behind Usk Police Station, that one particularly there, has any consideration, or could it be considered for a central storage of sandbags, say for example in Little Mill Village Hall, so that the residents could have access to them? With regards to the river as well, the River Usk, who is responsible for the clearing of the river with regards to self-seeding trees that have grown and the shifting banks that may or may not be assessed as impeding the river flow? And also possibly one for Carl in relation to the gully clearing. Councillor Maybe previously obviously pointed out it's not possible to clear all the drains throughout the whole of Monmouthshire, but can I ask how the additional resource that you referred to is being implemented? Is it based on Highways MyMon reports? Is it in liaison with ward members who would know the hotspots, as Councillor Riley just pointed out in her particular ward? How is that being assessed and prioritised, please? Thank you, Chair.
Ross, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Keir. In terms of the integrity of flood walls and banks, so just, I suppose a good example is the S-Town defences there. They're NRW, Natural Resources Wales, maintained assets. So they will get regularly inspected. I don't know what the regime of inspection is, but there's something called T98 inspections. So the T98 inspections are a dedicated inspection procedure for flood defences, and NRW would inspect those defences on using that procedure. It will identify defects and then inform future maintenance regimes, etc. So I can certainly take away an action to find out exactly when NRW do undertake those inspections. That would be, I think, useful for us as well to record. So I can take that away. In terms of the structural integrity, obviously we've spoken previously about that section of wall that doesn't actually form part of the formal NRW flood defence opposite Woodside Cottages. It actually forms part of the Esk Bridge parapet. So it's actually acting as a form of flood defence, and thankfully it's held since during recent years and during Storm Dennis in particular, albeit there was some seepage through the wall, which has been addressed by some localised maintenance works. But that section, like we've previously spoken about, as it's not really been designed as a formal flood defence, we would like to get some assurity that the structural integrity is there. There is an action within the action plan for the Esk catchment for us to undertake some further work around that. So I think it's important for that to be documented within the strategy so it's not lost, and that's a piece of work we'll be taking forward shortly. And then in terms of a central store of sandbags at Little Mill, yes, looking forward also to meeting you out there on Monday to discuss the issues there. I think there is certainly scope to provide such a store. It's something that we've done in other locations through various means, really. In certain locations we've provided the sandbag store or a shed and the bags themselves. In other locations, local communities have provided the infrastructure, a shed themselves, and then we will go and stock it as and when required. So we can certainly have a conversation around that and what can be provided in Little Mill. And then in terms of clearing of the River Esk, so Natural Resources Wales are the risk management authority for the River Esk. So in terms of clearing self-seeded trees and shoals of gravel, etc., that would Natural Resources Wales would be the authority to contact regarding that. Typically, they will only take action when they consider it to be a flood risk, and that sometimes can be the difficult conversation of, well, when does it become a flood risk? Quite often, when trees become dislodged and trapped on bridges, it's too late then because the problem's already there. So, perhaps you're referring to the area between the Esk Town Bridge and the old railway bridge. I'm aware that there's an area there just downstream of the old railway bridge which is building up, and there are quite a lot of trees now in that section which have been growing over a number of years now. So yes, happy to take that myself to Natural Resources Wales and get some comments, but I would also advise, if you wanted to pick that up as well, it would be Natural Resources Wales would be the point of contact.
Thank you. Councillor Keir, do you have anything else?
Yeah, can I just answer one point for Ross before Carl? I know Carl wants to come in. Yeah, the bridging, the integrity of the defences. I was actually referring to the flood. It looks like a concrete wall, but it's behind the police station, so it's on the town side rather than Woodside. It looks a fairly flimsy wall, but clearly isn't. So there must be some steel integrity behind it. So it was actually understanding who inspects that, but I think you're suggesting from your comment that that's NRW as well. So not just the Woodside or the actual main flood prevention banks that were installed. Are you saying all of that is NRW?
Yes, so my understanding is that flood wall around the back of the old police station there is part of the Esk Town defences. Like you said, it is very slender, so I'd imagine it is a steel piled wall which is then clad in the sort of the pebble dash cladding that you see there. But yes, that would form part of the Esk Town defences and would be NRW's responsibility to inspect and maintain. There is on NRW's website, there's something called the National Asset Database, which we feed into with some of our own assets as the lead local flood authority. But on their website, on that particular page, there's a map showing the location of all the defences that NRW currently maintain. So I'm sure that would confirm that as well if you wanted to take a look at that.
Thank you, Ross. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Carl?
Yeah, so the additional Vactor and Sweeper are currently out working. We're not getting a lot of calls. MCS, as you can imagine, over the last 6 weeks, given the weather has considerably changed. So it's out doing work that we know needed to be done. As we come into flood season now, we will be focusing on areas where we know there's going to be potential flooding and areas that are relatively new to flooding to us. I'm not saying Little Mill is hasn't been flooded before, but to the scale that it was flooded last year, these areas grow. Our knowledge base grows of what culverts and drains potentially block. It is always difficult with drainage assets. They can be clear. There's a leaf fall, there's a flood event, and the drain's blocked. That doesn't mean to say that the chamber is blocked, but the top is covered in leaf fall. Getting round during a storm to all of, we've got 20,000 drainage assets in the county. Getting round in a storm is very difficult, particularly when the teams are focused on sandbagging culverts and other water courses, and keeping the water flowing in general terms. So it's very difficult then to manage it all during a flood. So we are being more proactive in the way that we do the factoring of drainage systems. I'm happy to take advice from members if they've got particular concerns in particular areas that they think is a problem. We go into an area where we get a my council services request and try and clear the old drainage system. When we're dealing with the level of storms that we've had last year, we're literally coming out of one major storm, doing a lot of work, and going into another one. We don't have that time to be doing that proactive type work, so we are always on the back foot. So whatever we can get done now in the run-up, October, November, it sounds counterproductive, but it's very difficult to go out now, clear the drains, and then the leaf fall comes in October, November, and they're blocked again. So it's a balance that we're trying to get right, but certainly the work over the last 5 years on the floods for all of these events now is we have a much better knowledge base of what needs to be done, whether it's culverts, whether it's closing roads at trigger points, whether it's clearing drains before the events, knowing what's happening during the events. We have a much better understanding of, sadly, a much better understanding of flooding in Monmouthshire in general, because we've lived through so many of them now. So yeah, going forward, hopefully you will see more factoring, flashing lights out there that will give the public confidence that the drainage system is being cleared.
Thank you, Carl. So if we had specific areas, and I refer to them as hotspots, you would be happy to receive that in a sort of an email correspondence, or would you prefer them to be put on the MyMon system? How would for example, I'm referring to the Old Way Hill and down past the Hanley Court, where there were 14 Hanley Court area. There were 14 drains uncovered when the team got there because they'd just been covered up from detritus over a period of time.
I think feel free to put it on the MCS system. There is a route. Then it is it's got an audit trail. It's on the system for the teams to know that it's there. If I'm happy to be copied into that email if there's specific areas that you've got concerns about that are not being moved on. But again, we are just in an expectation management perspective. There's 20,000 drains out there. If all members name 100 drains that they've got concerns about, there's we've got one extra VACTA team. We will take the time getting around there.
I fully respect that, Carl.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your responses, both.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Now, has anybody else got any questions before I round it all up? Are we all happy? Well, I'd like to thank the team, everybody, for coming today and for answering some emotional subjects and for some. And I really would like to raise the issue that whilst we're talking about flooding, we should be very concerned about what's happening right now, which is the contrary, the opposite, and the drought and the possibility of wildfires. And they are all linked to the environmental change, and it's quite scary. We really do need to be aware, and we need to be encouraging our residents to be very vigilant about how they are socialising currently with fires, all instantly having an instant barbecue that can just, poof, it's gone. So just to recap on everybody, I'd like to thank everybody for their thoughts. Councillor Stevens is very concerned about Ned and Weir and making sure that everything is cleared off as often as possible. Okay, Councillor Newell, using user-friendly report, more drop-in sessions, communication to be much more fluid with the residents. September 2027, Welsh Government, a long time to wait for NRW forthcoming. Councillor Davis, grant funding from Welsh Government, how much is in the future? Costs of delivering surface and surface water in our LDP. We've got comments about National Flood Forum, public consultations. The flood team are very open to be communicated and approachable should any of the residents wish to get some advice now, because it's still very raw to people, so please do take advantage of that offer. Councillor Strong thanks the team, advice to residents, which we just spoke of, and flood warning service, making everybody really aware of it. Councillor Brown changed the plan for Monmouthback and Mathen. It was grateful received that those thoughts had actually been implemented. Concern about the pumping station at Prilmerick and building and changing of the water courses when houses are built, and inspection of culverts. For myself, natural flood management, leaky dams, trees, water with farmers, working with the farmers, training for road closures. Apparently there's a £170,000 grant to reduce flood with the Y&S Foundation, which is brilliant to hear. Drains cleaning and the programme to be increased. I think we've touched on that all the time. Councillor Keir, flood prevention, sandbags, clearing of self-seeding trees into the River Usk, and warning inspection at NRW at Usk, and working with the VAT cleaning team and understanding trigger points. So that's a brief roundup of everybody's thoughts. I'd like to thank you all very much, and to remind you all that the next meeting is on the 1st of October. And thank you for your patience and your interest in today's meeting. Unless anybody else has got anything to say, we are closed. Cheers.